Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Current Affairs Unfiltered. I'm your host, Paige Fullman. This week, we are bringing back another throwback guest, mostly because there is a little bit of chaos in Texas public education right now. So I decided to bring back Sam Smeaton, who was on last year to talk about what it really is like to be a public school teacher, especially in Texas. So I'm sure you saw the news, but a few weeks ago, Texas passed something that requires Bible stories to be taught in public school. And that was what made the national headlines. But there was so much more that was passed alongside that when Sam brought this up to me, I was like, yes, come on, let's do this. Let's beat this horse to death. And I also think it's important that, like I said, you all probably saw the news about the Bible stories, but there was so much more that wasn't covered in the news simply because the Bible stories was one of the most outwardly egregious things. So happy to have Sam on to talk all about this. And if you do live in Texas, take this episode as your lesson on what is going on. Make sure you go out and vote. Make sure you vote for people that are not voting for this nonsense in public schools. And yeah, but a little refresher on Sam before we get into it. Sam hosts the All the Things That Matter podcast, which covers intersections of culture, education, and religion in America. He's also a veteran educator and currently teaches U.S. history in Texas, where he also coached football for 10 years. He holds a bachelor's degree from West Texas A&M University, and a master's degree from Lincoln Christian University. He and his wife also have 2 sons. Sam uses his platform to promote education reform, human rights, democracy, and conversations on Christianity and religious issues in America. And all of that shines through in today's episode. Without further ado, here is my second episode with Sam. Sam, thank you so much for coming back to Current Affairs Unfiltered. It is great to have you back on.
I appreciate you having me. It's good to have, a connection where you can kind of amplify some of the educational issues that need to be amplified. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So let's start with the TEKS, Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills Standards. So that has been something that has been up in the air in Texas for a minute. But for people that have not been following this story or may not have been paying very close attention, what is the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills Standards, and why are they so important?
So the TEKS are analogous to what I imagine you'd find in almost any other state, which is the standardized learning targets and topics and skills for all of K through 12 in the state of Texas. And the State Board of Education generally are the ones who will approve changes to the TEKS year in and year out. There's always plenty of revisions and changes, normally for the most part, pretty boring and uncontroversial, at least historically. But that's not been the case lately. As the political climate has been what it is, now we're starting to see changes being made to the standards. And the changes do tend to reflect some pretty troubling ideological waters, I think. TEKS should be, and almost anyone would agree, again, historically at least you'd think, that they should be a relatively nonpartisan issue. This is just what do we want covered and what skills do we want taught to our students. It really shouldn't be an ideological fight at all, but unfortunately, it has really descended into one.
So you've been sounding the alarm over some of the proposed changes, especially to the social studies standards. What were, to you, the most concerning revisions that they came up with this past year?
So there's a number of them. And the ones that got through, which there was plenty proposed that didn't get through, and I know we'll get to that. The thing that caught the most national attention was the fact that Bible stories were going to be part of mandated reading lists. And that is kind of a sea change. I mean, seeing religious text become required in public schools certainly is going to attract a lot of attention from across the nation and has. There's nothing terribly strange or controversial about the Bible stories chosen. I mean, you got Adam and Eve, the Beatitudes, the story of the prodigal son.
The
Like,
classics.
yes, exactly. Nothing real out of left field. But again, the fact that they are part of mandated curriculum certainly has raised further questions about First Amendment concerns, as there already have been since, in case people don't know, that it is now Texas law for all of us teachers to have the Ten Commandments physically posted on a poster in our classrooms. That is required now. So we've already kind of had that question hovering over us, and the Bible stories added to the reading list is certainly going to intensify that. Now, there is an opt-out, okay, sort of. There is an opt-out option where if parents don't want their kids to do the religious text, they don't have to. However, the state also makes clear that these texts still may well be tested. So just because you opt out of it, your kids still might be tested over it. And so it's a little bit of a trap door there in that opt-out rule.
Right.
You don't have to do it, but if you don't, then you're still going to be tested on it. And kind of keeping with the religious factor for a minute, there's a really striking anti-Muslim flavor in here as well, because broadly speaking, part of the change is we're eliminating the world cultures course from sixth grade entirely. And it's being replaced with a much more Texas and America-centric curriculum. So what I think is critical for kids that age to become acclimated to world cultures and world history, really for the first time in detail, that's gone now. And that overlaps, I think, with kind of the anti-Muslim stuff. So the deletion that really caught my eye was deleting the emphasis on Muslim contributions to algebra and geometry, which is definitely pretty striking, because obviously anybody who's read history knows that algebra, we use Arabic numerals, and algebra is, I believe, an Arabic word. And so obviously there's heavy Muslim contributions, and those were removed as required standards, which maybe you could have explained away if it weren't also for the fact that the way that Islam and the Prophet Muhammad are talked about has changed too. There's now going to be an added emphasis on the military conquests of Muhammad and the female captives that he took, and they are renewing emphasis on that while also removing emphasis on Muslim contributions to algebra and geometry. And of course, you could talk about, I mean, again, if you know history, you know that it was the Muslim empires that preserved the Greek philosophers for us. The only reason we had it is because they had philosophers and translators. But that's all kind of disappeared, and you have this too. So that's kind of the first chunk of this, I think, is the religious aspect of it, where it is, obviously, it is a very pro-Christian slant, and the contributions of the world's other largest religion are very much devalued and drawn back. And some of the rhetoric that State Board of Education members and those testifying used against Islam was much stronger. There was some heavy Islamophobia as part of the testimony and discussions. Thankfully, some of those more extreme sentiments didn't come through in the TEKS, but it's pretty obvious to me what they're doing here.
Right. So, out of curiosity, what is the most egregious example that wasn't passed? That was just insane. Because this already sounds crazy, but like, I feel like there's worse, considering you're saying that not all of it passed.
Right. Okay. So I'll give you two. I'll give you one that did get through and one that didn't. So, one that did not get through was, and this is where I kind of have to mention the Texas Public Policy Foundation for the first time, and what they were advising members of the State Board of Education to do. And we'll talk more about the money side of that here in a minute. But part of the proposals that you saw from the Texas Public Policy Foundation was to basically remove certain critical thinking standards, and saying that certain critical thinking standards were going to make kids too skeptical of the founders and too skeptical of the foundations of America, and that builds an anti-American bias. It really is Orwellian. If people want to follow me on Instagram, they'll see I did a few reels where I kind of broke this down, and it's astonishing what they really wanted to do. Like, too much skepticism could lead you to question America, so we need to be, that's anti-American to think too critically. So that was one of the ones that I really felt like I was reading performance art or something, but
Right.
but it was real. Another change that did get through, some of these are subtle, okay? Like, what, let me ask you this. What do you call that thing that happened in Tulsa to Black Wall Street?
The Tulsa Race Massacre?
No, Paige, it's the Tulsa Race Riot now.
Right. Sorry.
We
My
yes,
bad.
we have changed that in the teaks. The word massacre was removed and the word riot was added. So we want to make sure that we are minimizing what was done to the people of Greenwood in Tulsa on Black Wall Street. So that's subtle but clear, and it goes along with some other racial stuff where the way that Jim Crow is talked about, there have been subtle changes. Most people who know American history know that those who were perpetrating Jim Crow and those who were part of the Klan at the height of its
Right.
powers were state and local officials, not federal officials, quite the contrary. But language, including an emphasis on state and local participation in Jim Crow and their perpetration of it, that was removed. So there's no more state and local language to kind of emphasize that it was, in fact, your county sheriff, your judge, your
Right.
pastor in some cases, who were the Klansmen, who were the ones involved in lynchings. That state and local language was subtly removed. And there's the other one that I'll kind of stop after this because I could keep going. But the one other one that I wanted to mention was that there was a standard that emphasized making sure that we hear from minority and repressed perspectives in history, that we also hear a little bit of the story from those who were, I think the language in the actual standard before was those who were left out, right? Those who were excluded institutionally or repressed or subjugated, their perspectives needed to be heard too. That standard was removed entirely. So again, some of this is small, some of it's not, but even when it's small, all taken together, there's a very clear picture that's emerging here.
Right.
And the picture is one of an ideologically extreme wing of Texas politics. People like our governor and lieutenant governor, unfortunately. Our lieutenant governor said just last week, there is no such thing as separation of church and state. There is no such thing. It is not in the Constitution. And so that's the philosophy that's driving a lot of this. And there's also just, I think, some political opportunism happening. There's a desire to seize a moment of power and mold things to your liking, which to a degree is part of politics, of course. But when you're talking about the standards that are going to be taught to, our state has 35 million people. Okay, this is a lot of children, and this is the kind of stuff that's not going to be required for their teachers to address and how they are supposed to address it. And if none of that troubles you, then I'm not quite sure where you're coming from, because this is pretty dangerous stuff.
Right. Well, and I think the most alarming part to me is that it is truly children from like K through 12 that this is affecting. Like, this is not an attack on higher ed. This is not just an attack on like high schools where you have, AP classes that are a pretty standardized curriculum. Like, this is an attack on 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds.
Yeah,
which is crazy.
Some of these, the Bible story requirements are starting as young as 6. I mean, that's where some of that will begin once it gets phased in over the next few years. And it really is a restructuring across the board because, again, there's a particular sequencing of, and I'm a social studies guy, so that's where I'm focused, of what you expect for you do your world history, and then you do your first half of U.S. history, and then you do world geography, and there's a coherence to it. That's all kind of getting shuffled with this, because now that you don't have world cultures anymore, you're going to have kind of this newfangled, revamped Texas and America-centric curriculum that we have never had in Texas before, that is not sequenced like anything that we've seen in probably a generation. I mean, it's a complete gutting of how we have been doing it. So there's all those procedural problems too, that in addition to the political ones.
So critics, which I think we can put both of us into that, are saying that these changes are more ideological than educational, which, duh. What do you think was driving them, though? I mean, you mentioned a little bit at the top, but if you have anything else to say on that.
Yeah, I think that there's a sense among a certain wing of Texas power players that, that the state has inched closer and closer to electing Democrats statewide again. Hasn't happened yet. They've had some close calls. And I think there's a sense of while there's so much right-wing power play in Texas still, as there has been for over 30 years now, that they want to put things in place as much as they can with the time they have in power. Because I think that they can probably read the political tea leaves and see that we haven't had a meaningful chance this close at a statewide Democrat in quite some time. And so I think that the desire to get all their stuff in while they have the levers of power is part of what's driving it. And I also think there's just a really obvious Christian nationalist element to this. I don't know how you can read it any other way. How you can read it as including Bible stories, deleting Muslim contributions, emphasizing almost exclusively the crimes of the Prophet Muhammad, while simultaneously putting the Ten Commandments in the classroom. I mean, that it tells a pretty clear story of this religious orientation, and it's not like that's something they're hiding. I mean, a lot of them they genuinely believe like this is a Christian nation. Being Christian is part of being American, and that's what this should look like. So you can't undersell that aspect of it. And that's obviously something that not all Christians in Texas are on board with, of course, but it is significant.
Right. So you mentioned the role of the Texas Public Policy Foundation in this process. What concerns did educators have about outside organizations helping shape these state curriculum standards?
So in general, it wouldn't be super unusual to have an outside agency doing some work on something like this because, I mean, you hope that there's some sort of expertise being used, which, by the way, kind of a sidebar here, that was when these TEKs were being constructed on the front end of this, long before they voted on finalizing them, there was a very, very small window for teacher contributions and for teachers to be asked. They shooed the teachers in and out very quickly. So talking to experts is not a given for these people, but they do consult with various, what should be experts. But in this case, the Texas Public Policy Foundation is an extremely partisan think tank. You know, they were big on the get critical race theory out of schools, and they do some climate change denial, and they favor the elimination of school property taxes, which is kind of how we fund our schools. They're very pro-voucher. They want education privatized. So this is not just like you're outsourcing it to some of the nerds who know what they're doing, right? That's not really what this is. This is very clear. And they gave Don Fraser from Schreiner University was a consultant, one of the consultants on constructing these new TEKs, and the TPPF gave him over $70,000 in order to guide the new TEKs in a direction that they saw fit. And so some of their wish list definitely got in. I mentioned a few of them. Thankfully, not all of them did, as we talked about. But that kind of financial incentive being given out from a hyper-partisan think tank. I mean, can you imagine if MoveOn.org gave or Occupy Democrats gave $70,000 to somebody to write curriculum? I mean, the state would burn. So, you know, this is obviously a huge corruption issue of the process from top to bottom. And so, on one hand, the TPPF is just kind of another partisan think tank. But once they got involved in this and are shelling out some pretty serious cash to get what they want, that should bother everybody.
Right. Right. So is this an annual meeting where like they come together once a year to vote on the new curriculum, or is this like a, you know, more of a once every 5-year, 10-year thing?
They make adjustments yearly, but normally you see kind of a cycle every several years. You'll see changes made. So it's normally kind of a non-story because year to year, the adjustments that you see, like I said, are small. They're inconsequential for the most part. This was unprecedented. This is a complete paradigm shift. And again, you kind of asked me the question earlier, like, why is that? Why are we taking a process that's been relatively mundane and turning it into a staging ground for a culture war? You know, it's pretty telling.
Right. Well, that's when the news broke. And again, when we talked about this yesterday on the phone, like I had said, I had no idea what you were talking about when you had reached out to me. And then all of a sudden, 5 days later, my social media feed is flooded with Bible stories are now required in Texas public schools. And I was stunned that this was not something that I had heard about before, because that seems like a huge deal. But as you said, like, you know, there were some even crazier stuff that didn't get through. And probably thank goodness for that. But like, it almost seems like you said, they're creating the breeding grounds for this culture war where like people
Yeah.
are kind of normalizing it and like, oh, like let's wait and see what passes, and then all of a sudden your social media is just. By the way, there's Bible stories in Texas schools now. Like,
Yes, and I forgot. I have to shout out the nearly 600 teachers who went down to Austin to testify. Some of my good friends made it down there. My schedule wouldn't allow me to. I did definitely submit some rather stern online comments to them, which you can do it online also, and they'll read it. So that was I tried to do my piece there, but teachers definitely went after this, and not just for the ideological reasons. Because you don't have teachers and educators actually doing the heavy lifting, you have some developmentally really inappropriate stuff just in terms of what you're teaching young kids. You're basically trying to dump patriotic, civics lessons into first graders. And to a degree that's normal, right? We've all had kind of that civics stuff. We all did that, name the presidents and stuff, and learning about writing the Constitution. That stuff's been there. But this new kind of super kind of partisan angle at it, and teaching topics that aren't really developmentally appropriate for
right.
early childhood, that's an issue too.
Yeah. So did these teachers that so bravely went down, gave their public comments, did it make a difference in your opinion? Like, did anything that they said about specific measures end up contributing to either its passage or failure?
I want to think so. I have to think that it mattered somewhat because there was so much. But it's a little bit like an oral argument at the Supreme Court. Once you get to that, the justices' minds are made up, right? So
Right.
by the time it gets to public comment on this kind of stuff, it's a similar principle. I don't know how much listening the state board really did. I imagine with that volume of testimony, some of it came through and maybe they were sympathetic to, but it's tough for me to think that they really listened, because if they were really listening and taking it seriously, we would not be saying what we're saying.
And are these people that are on the state board, who are they teachers? Are they
Oh
elected
no.
in? Like,
Yes,
who
they
are
are
they?
elected. They are elected. And so actually this is triggering some attention on Texas State Board of Education elections, which is not an election that normally is going to get, much ink in the press, right? But it's going to definitely have some this time. I think you're going to see people deciding to run for offices like this, because a lot of times people will it's such a far down ballot race that most folks just they elect, okay, who's there, who's the Democrat, who's the Republican, and they just kind of do it straight ticket style usually.
Wait, they
But
run partisanly?
yes, and
That's
so,
insane. Okay.
well, I mean, let me put it this way: there is no secret whatsoever to the
Got
ideology
it.
at this point,
Okay.
because they are just out there saying what they want to get in there. There's not really any. There's not much of a semblance of neutrality or nonpartisanship,
Right.
especially when you're having some of the statements made about the elimination of Islam and stuff like that, and that's masks are off. We know who we're getting, and so I think you're going to see some of that actually get some attention here from the electorate in the state of Texas because of all this.
Right. So we talked a little bit about some of the measures that had passed or not passed, but if there's any more you want to talk about, I'd love for you to lay out those. And if there were any that were surprising to you, whether you were surprised that they passed or surprised
Hmm.
that they didn't pass.
I think I've gotten to a point where it's very difficult to surprise me. So, I don't, because again, we kind of know who these folks are and what they're pushing for. So I can't say I'm stunned by any of the ones that got through. I was taken aback a little bit when I read, as I said, the Texas Public Policy Foundation stuff. That was an exception. That did knock me backwards a little bit, some of what they were pushing. I think some of the worst stuff didn't make it through, like I mentioned, but it's I'm less surprised and more just kind of like, yeah, like this is what these people want to do with power, and that's it's almost got to be expected at a certain point, and
Right.
to face the reality of it so we can deal with it.
Right. So in practical terms and like implementing this, what do these changes mean for students and teachers? Like,
Mhm.
what will classrooms actually look like because of this vote?
It's stressing a lot of teachers out because especially veterans who have been teaching a particular topic for a long time, particular content, a lot of that is getting overturned. I mean, if you've taught sixth grade in the past, like your life's about to change. And really, all of us in social studies, ultimately, our life's going to change because it's all going to be sequenced completely different. Like I said, you're going to have this America and Texas all the way through thing that simply follows what we call a scope and sequence that is just completely alien to what social studies teachers in the state have done and have been doing. And the English teachers are sounding the alarm too because of the reading list is so, and I'm not an expert on this part of it because English is not my field, but the nature of the readings and the way that they're assigned and the number of readings that are packed in are done so clumsily. The teachers are like, how am I supposed to read this book and get it analyzed in this amount of time with this age of kids?
Right.
There was really just very little thought given to those sorts of considerations. So it was going to be a squeeze on teachers and students, I think, to get stuff in because it was just kind of thrown together by folks that have never darkened the door of a classroom, which has long-term consequences.
Right. Well, and I think what's the timeline for implementation isn't necessarily all this coming school year for the 2026-2027 school year. So there's, not to hope pill anyone, but I guess there is a little bit of time to fight back and maybe not have it all implemented.
There is. And I don't know that, it'd be hard to imagine this November's midterms being more intense in this country than they're already going to be, but more fuel on the fire. Yeah. I think for that very reason.
Yeah. Do you think this, like, on the ground in Texas, are you seeing people fired up about this, or is this more of something that is kind of falling to the wayside?
It's falling to the wayside less and less because a lot of things that teachers have just been muttering about in Texas for years, regardless of their political affiliation, was complaining about No Child Left Behind and its impact on things, and complaining about standardized testing and high-stakes standardized testing at the end of the year. Very few teachers like that. And opposition to vouchers. That's been something that's been pretty strong in education. Teachers have been muttering about that stuff for years, but now with the threats being realized in many cases, I'm definitely seeing more political activism from educators than I've seen in my career. And obviously for teachers who are more left-leaning, it's more vocal. But there's a lot of conservative teachers that do not want our, for instance, our school property taxes eliminated. They don't want a statewide voucher system. They don't want that stuff. They don't want a sensible sequence for their English class to be overturned. So I definitely have seen a shift in the number of teachers who are activated and angry. Some of them not really for political reasons, just simply because on an educational and pedagogical basis, what they're being asked to do doesn't make any sense.
Right. Well, it's making a mockery out of the career that they've chosen for, in some cases, the last 30 years, 40 years. Like, and especially,
and I think they've gotten worn out from that. Like, there's so many decades of being underfunded and so many decades of being underpaid, and then you throw all this on top of it. Like, it's the dam might be breaking a little bit.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you mentioned that, like, a lot of these are about to overturn, like, social studies and history teachers' lives and English teachers. For history teachers, like, those are just a bunch of, excuse me if this doesn't apply to you, but history nerds, like, people that, like, just eat up the like nitty-gritty, the nitty-gritty of history, like the ins and outs. Like, I loved my history teachers because they all had, like, their, like, little special interests that, like, they just loved about history. But when you are, like, you get your education and you read all about history and now you're being told to teach something that quite literally it does not exist in your historical education is crazy. Like, you're literally being asked to, like, make stuff up.
And it's so frustrating on so many levels. And, there's so much gratifying about at the sixth grade level when you do that world culture and world history stuff. Like, that's really, really valuable for kids at that age to start recognizing that they are part of a global community.
Right.
That's critical to any education. So that's one example of what you're talking about. Like, those teachers are going to have to be doing something almost completely different as this all gets phased in.
Right. So more broadly, why do you think public education has become such a major political battleground in Texas?
Because I think in an age of extremism, you're always going to have an emphasis on education and how we're educating or propagandizing or indoctrinating the kids, for better or worse. That always tends to happen when you have kind of extreme politics going on. That's true historically. You know, we have to raise up kids in our schools with this particular set of beliefs because that's what makes a good country, right? And so that, I think, again, just kind of as a history guy, is relatively par for the course. I mean, you look at the most notorious dictatorships in history. I mean, look at the educational systems that, whether it's the Soviets or the Nazis or what you see today in North Korea, like that's always what extremists on any part of the spectrum are going to want to do: lock down education for their own ideological purposes. And that it's something that I think doesn't have a great history when it has happened.
Right.
I'm not envisioning the worst case scenario, but there's real long-term harm here.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, what do you think that even looks like? Like, say these things, all of the things that have passed, they go into effect. Like, what do you think the effect is in Texas, say 20 years from now? Like, what are we looking at? I think it's easy to say, like, oh, the population's going to be stupid. I don't want to, stoop
Yeah.
to that level, which, even though I think it would have some merit to it, but like, what other kind of consequences are we looking at?
Well, if you project it out far enough, if this kind of stuff runs unchecked, then you're just going to have, and everybody already thinks this, right? Regardless of their politics, you're going to have a bunch of Americans graduating high school and college that have a completely distorted sense of their history. Now, everybody says that, right? I mean, folks on the right say, well, kids are raised to hate America and all that stuff. And folks on the left say, they're sold this religion of American exceptionalism. And like, everybody kind of thinks that. But it really is true. I think if you're going to graduate a bunch of kids and you're going to steadily take out pretty key pieces of information and framing. Framing is really important.
Right.
How you frame the Tulsa Race Massacre matters. How you frame Jim Crow and who was responsible for it matters. How you frame religions other than Christianity matters. And so I think over time, that's just going to create, if it were to run unchecked, which I'm not resigned to yet, just a lot of Texans who are going to have a very cherry-picked notion of their own history instead of the most holistic picture we can put together of the best and the worst and everything in between. So that's something you have to look out for. But I'm not, like I said, I'm not resigned to that yet.
I am not either, because again, I'm feeling hope-pilled lately. I'm feeling
Yeah.
like changes on the horizon, so I'm
Yeah.
feeling like there could be hope that this doesn't all go into effect. Like, it's, again, some of the things you've outlined are like clinically insane to expect in public schools, where I can't imagine implementation, if it gets to that point, being successful.
Yeah, especially just because Texas is so populous and so diverse. Like, you're going to get a lot more pushback here than you're going to get in, for instance, in Mississippi, when, the governor, like, enthusiastically in the last decade reinstates Confederate Heritage Month or whatever, or
Right.
like, you don't see the level of pushback in a state like that because it's just not as sprawling and populous. But this one, we're so diverse. There's too many angry
Right.
people. There's
Right.
just too many angry people in too many different places.
Right. So let's zoom out a little bit and talk about the Texas Senate race, where James Tallarico has won the Democratic nomination and is headed to the general ballot in November. I think it's super important to talk to you because, as I said to you, I don't like to speak on elections that I am not experiencing. I don't know the Texan experience. I don't understand what you are experiencing on the ground. So I'd love to get your perspective on what you are hearing from voters and educators especially about the Senate race this year.
So being in a deep red, one of the deepest red parts of the state, you always have kind of a dichotomy politically with what you hear on the ground up here. You don't hear a bunch of people hyping up Greg Abbott. You don't hear conservative people just hyping up how much they love him. You don't have them hyping up, certainly not Ken Paxton, but even when it was Cornyn, it's not like everybody was like, I'm a huge John Cornyn fan. Like, they vote Republican reliably, but the enthusiasm that you have for, say, a Donald Trump is not necessarily there. And so that's been the case for a bit now. And now that you have a candidate like Tallarico who has factors like devout Christianity and, coming from, he lives a conservative lifestyle, is a pretty vanilla guy that it's hard to pin any of their culture war stuff to. That's a candidate that can do some damage. And you're not just hearing that from Texans here, like nationally from party leaders. You heard it from Cornyn. Like Cornyn felt like if he lost the primary, that was going to seriously jeopardize the redness of this state. And so people that are generally conservative, some of those voters are going to be available to James Tallarico. Now, I don't know how many. That's tough to gauge. I saw one poll recently after the Republican primary that had about 20 some odd percent of Cornyn voters saying that they would vote for Tallarico. Now, if that holds, that would be very significant.
Right.
How much of that is post-primary anger because Cornyn supporters hated Paxton so much that it was like an emotional response? Hard to say. But I think some voters like that are real integrity voters, and you're looking at Paxton, a guy that was impeached by the Republicans in the Texas legislature, and just are not going to be able to hold their nose quite tight enough. Now, a lot probably will, but some of those voters are going to be available. And because, again, the culture war stuff is going to be hard to pin, and that's what plays. What I've seen the most of and heard the most of kind of against Tallarico is actually not really policy stuff. It's religious stuff. It's the he distorts scripture. He's not a real Christian. That's where I've seen the loudest criticism of Tallarico, because I think on the policy issues, it's a little bit trickier. I think if you're going to try to attack him for wanting to protect and fully fund our public schools and give teachers a raise, okay, he's got a lot of policy platforms that are just not really going to play into the easy to caricature playbook.
Right.
And they're still doing weird stuff, don't get me wrong. I mean, they're still, he's trans, or, I mean, it's just, they just
the
throw
stuff that came out right after the primary. I was like, this is the worst Oppo research I've seen in my life.
It was awful. And it's like, if you don't like his policies, fine. Criticize his policy proposals. Great. That's what it's for. What are you doing with all this other nonsense?
Right.
But again, I don't want to minimize it. For some religious Texans, that are very conservative evangelicals, they believe that James Tallarico's more progressive and inclusive brand of Christianity is religiously wrong. And so that's what you're hearing more of, not Tallarico getting attacked on policy. But I do think that that's telling.
Right.
Because that means that a lot of independents are going to be like, well, I mean, I'm not asking him to be my pastor.
Right.
Which coincidentally is what I heard all the time when the same people were voting for Mitt Romney, who was LDS when they weren't.
Right.
And they were like, oh, he's not going to be my pastor. I'm just voting for him for Ben. But I digress on that point. But he's marketable to moderates and to independents. And every poll that's come out so far, Tallarico has massive leads among independents, 20, 30-point leads with independents. And that is going to be hard for Paxton to overcome, I think. So I think Real Clear Politics has it at about a 3-point Tallarico advantage. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I think 538 has it virtually tied. I mean, this thing it's going to go down to the wire.
Right. So can we take a step back, actually, and can you talk a little bit about the Cornyn-Paxton divide? Like obviously Cornyn was the sitting senator.
Yep.
Paxton was the challenger.
Mm-hmm.
What happened? Why did Cornyn fall out of favor? Like, what was that experience on the ground?
People have just taken John Cornyn for granted for so long. I mean, it's kind of like, I imagine, if you're in Vermont, how you would be with Bernie, right? Like, he's going to be reelected. He's a Texas stalwart. He's an old, true legislative process guy, kind of seen as a senator's senator and a known quantity. But when everybody is as angry as they are in this country right now about Congress not getting stuff done and problems not being solved, incumbents are under fire on both sides of the aisle. I mean, you're seeing it. And that made Cornyn vulnerable in a way he hadn't been. And Paxton really leaned into a lot of the culture war stuff. He leaned into his Trump allegiance. And when Trump endorsed him, I think for the base of the Republican base, that was kind of the blessing that they were waiting for. Like, they got Trump's blessing. This guy's going to be MAGA. He's going to do all the things that you voted for. Cornyn is not loyal enough to the MAGA movement and is not going to do the things that you voted for. So you got to get somebody in there who will. And on the Cornyn side, it was mostly bewilderment. The Cornyn supporters that I know were like, this cannot be happening. Like, surely the guy that basically got run out of Austin by his own party for his affairs and his corruption and his bribery and everything else, like, surely. I think Cornyn voters are still completely stunned. And I don't entirely blame them, because I can tell you confidently, I know and am close with many, many, many Republicans. I don't know a single one who likes Paxton. But yet, that's kind of his allegiance to the MAGA mission, whatever that means to you, I think was enough to say, hey, Cornyn's an old school guy. He's not MAGA. He's not one of us. It's time for a change.
Right. So education is not always a top tier campaign issue. But do you think at this moment, given James Tallarico's background, that it has the potential, and also the Teak stuff, does it have the potential to move voters in Texas this cycle?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it already is to a certain degree. Again, it's hard to prove that with the data just yet, but you look at those little hints, like I said a minute ago, Cornyn supporters that are going to go Tallarico, or independents or maybe lower motivation voters that are polling really well for Tallarico. I think a lot of that is it's going to be quiet. It's not going to be loud. These are not going to be people putting Tallarico signs up in their lawn. They're not going to be going to see him if he comes to speak here. But he's still going to get more of those votes than he would have if Cornyn were the nominee. And so that subtle shift with feeling like, hey, this attack on education is making me really uncomfortable. I want the teachers and students in my community to have the best. And just the fact that how long can you push back that one party's been in charge of our state for almost 40 years and education has fallen to where it is and our performance is so poor. So a lot of that support is going to be quiet, probably, and hard to detect beforehand. But anybody who's on the ground here knows it's there.
Right. Well, that's what, I was so astounded when Paxton won, because all of the polling said and showed that if Paxton were to win, Tallarico would have a better chance at winning. And if Cornyn won, it would have been a little bit more of an uphill battle for him, because in a race against Cornyn, it was just, do you want this nice white guy to be your representative or this other just normal white guy to be your representative? They were just two kind of normal dudes that were just being normal. And Ken Paxton is fucking crazy.
And he doesn't fit, any of those typical molds. Paxton is a complete wild card.
Right.
And so, it was the kind of thing where you kind of see, I guess, what the primary litmus test is in the Republican Party. Like, it doesn't appear to be your prior allegiance. It appears to be what kind of the head of the movement wants.
Right.
Even if that puts you in worse statistical standing.
Right. And data shows that primary voters are typically those that are furthest to the fringes, which is why a lot of times the fringe candidates are the ones that win the primaries. So I'm not surprised that Paxton won, just knowing that. But again, the decision went from, do you want this normal guy or this normal guy, to do you want this normal guy or this nut that was ran out of Austin by his own party?
Yep. Yeah.
What are we doing?
And that's why there was a ton of excitement on the Democratic side. The fundraising emails went absolutely crazy that day. I was like, oh my God, we got shot. I can't believe they did this. But the thing is, and what Democrats have to realize is this is not a foregone conclusion. This is still going to be a very, very tight race. And I know that it's for Democrats who felt like Beto was going to get over the hump against Cruz and didn't quite. It's starting to feel like that again. I think it will be closer than that race was, but this is going to be a photo finish.
Right. So Democrats have spent years thinking that Texas is going to become more competitive. Do you think that is actually happening, or is Texas still fundamentally a Republican state?
The thing is, Texas is an everything state, but because Republicans have had power for so long, they've been able to pretty efficiently, through, gerrymandering and things like that, been able to hold power comfortably even while changes were going on. Like, they saw anybody that looks back at the numbers can see the trend. You look at presidential elections from 2000 through 2020, that Republican, Bush won by 20 points in the general election in 2000 here. But by the time you get to 2020, Trump's only winning by 5 points, or 6 points. So they've seen that gap closing, but they've been able to hold it at bay because they have the reins of power. And they thought, okay, but a Democrat still can't get elected statewide. We can still draw the map in such a way where growing Democratic sentiment in the big cities is kind of neutralized. But if you start electing statewide Democrats, that's the dam breaking finally. Going from there's discontent that you actually have to campaign here as a Republican now, and you actually have to do debates, and you have to invest yourself in the race. Going from that to their power is predicated on keeping those offices.
Right.
And I still think on the state level, they're probably pretty safe. I think Democrats will see a bump at the state level, but again, because of just how the map sits and everything, it's hard to imagine that yet. But the state legislature going blue would be the full shift. And I don't see that happening yet.
Right. Right. Well, and statewide is theoretically the easiest thing to accomplish because that is just pure number of votes to number of votes rather than districts, which can, as you know in Texas and I know in Illinois, be gerrymandered to shit.
Exactly.
Where it doesn't matter how many, how many red and how many blue there are.
Yeah. And I think that, one of the things that gets slept on a little bit is we've talked so much about gerrymandering in the House of Representatives in the past several months. It never gets talked about how on the state level the gerrymandering happens too, in the state government. And that also becomes really significant because you kind of have two layers of protection, right? You can draw both of those maps to your state and your federal. So it's still uphill, but I mean, a statewide Democrat is very much in play in Texas, and that we could probably only say that twice in the last 30 years.
Right. And I'm hopeful. Like I said, I've been getting a lot of positive content lately where I'm like, oh, he could do this. Like this could be a thing. Like after some of the like big organizations started to say like, oh, Texas is in play this year, I was like, oh shit. Like we are on the come up. Like let's get this done.
Yeah, and it's been, I mean, people forget, like it was, I mean, within my lifetime, Texas was considerably more blue. Ann Richards was a very popular governor down here, and that's kind of what's interesting about it is that's kind of you had that in the 80s and 90s, the Texas Democrat, the Ann Richards.
Are you Texas born and raised? Like this is.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So I
You've
mean,
seen it all.
Yeah. And so like the Ann Richards seems like a movie character now, that you had this big haired, chain smoking, thick accented liberal Democrat lady running the state. That seems like fantasy right now. And so it's taken since 94, whenever that was, when she lost to W. It's been a real political transformation, and we might be on the verge of another political era here.
Right. Well, fingers crossed that James Talarico wins. But one last question for you. When people are looking ahead, what do you think is the bigger story that people should be paying attention to in Texas? Like, should people be focusing on the curriculum fight itself, or more about like what it says about where Texas politics is headed? Like, what's the story people should look at in Texas?
I think the story that people should look at is education. Public ed has been under some kind of attack for decades. I talked about that last time I was on the show. Like that's a concerted campaign. And in an era of extremism, you have to make sure that things that should not be part of an ideological war don't become that. And that's really hard to do. School should it should not be a place where we're fighting to see who can better indoctrinate the kids. That's really dangerous stuff. And so that's why I think you need to keep an eye on who's on your local board, your school board, who's on your state school board, because there's a little bit of political momentum to this now. And so you need to keep an eye on what exactly the standards are going to be, what teachers are saying about it, what financial gifts are rolling into people to do it. Because we all kind of take that for granted. Let's be real. Like that's, even us as teachers, we don't always think about it. Like but it's not the state of nature. The standards you're going to teach are not just set in stone for eternity. They can be changed by ideologues and extremists, and you have to be on guard for that.
Right. Absolutely. That is all that I have for you. Is there anything else you feel like I might have missed?
No, I don't think so. I think we did a pretty good job of covering all our bases.
Yeah, of course. So I will have your Instagram linked in the show notes now that you are
Okay.
up there posting your reels so everyone can go watch those. And I always think it's great to hear, again, from the people that are on the ground and experiencing the things that we read in the news. I find it troublesome to have to form an opinion on something before actually talking to somebody that is experiencing the thing that we're talking about. So
Yeah,
I'm so thankful that you're out there doing the good work and posting the videos so that people like me from across the country can understand what's going on.
absolutely. And I'm happy to do it. And I think that kind of connecting like-minded people from across the country is really at a premium right now.
Right, definitely. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And if anything else crazy in Texas public ed happens, I'm happy to be a platform for you.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of Current Affairs Unfiltered. Sam is always just a pleasure to have on. I get overjoyed when he emails me and has a new Texas update. As I said at the top, there's always some stories that make it to the national level, but there was so much in what Sam talked about that didn't make it to the national level that I think is important for all people to hear, mostly because if you are in a red or purple state, that is what can happen. And even if you were in a blue state, things could change. Those things can happen. They can happen to any of us. And it's important that we all understand what is going on in the world around us. So if you live in Texas, make sure you're voting for not those people. Make sure you're getting angry about what is going on in your public schools. And if you don't live in Texas, make sure to potentially support financially or otherwise pro-public education candidates that don't believe in this nonsense. Be sure to pay attention to your own local school board and state school board races to make sure that stuff like this does not happen. And make sure you're talking about this with people that you know, even if they don't live in Texas. Like I said, it's important that people understand what is going on in other states. And that's about it. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, or share it with someone who could use this information. To support this podcast, you can also subscribe to my Substack, She Knows the Score, which is linked in the show notes. And as always, if you have questions, topic suggestions, or just want to say hi, you can find me on social media at Current Affairs Unfiltered Pod on Instagram, or send me an email at currentaffairs.unfilteredpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Keep asking questions, stay engaged, and support your public schools. I will see you guys next week.